There's so many things I got to ask on this. So, I mean, you got human trafficking, sex trafficking, fentanyl, and all the drugs come across the border. But because of your background, I want to talk specifically about potential terrorist folks being in the United States. How many do you think in the last 3 years has made it into the United States? If you had to put just a guess number of how many military fighting age males that potentially terrorists in the United States that made it through in the last 3 years.
I think 1,500 approximately.
50, and those, I guess, what type of threat would that be? What are they capable of? How are they dispersing themselves? How would they position themselves for attack? What kind of attack would we be in threat of?
Well, first, when you talk about skills, right, there's different levels. So there's terrorists who've been terrorists for decades. They fought like in Iraq, et cetera. Those ones are very concerning, right? Because they are hardened. They also have an emotional issue, right?
Sure.
They lost their brothers in arms in Iraq, right? They're a little more motivated. Then you have what would be like the new trainees and new recruits, right? Some have no training, like you might be ISIS follower and have zero training, right? They don't even care if you have training. And then Al-Qaeda, at least, Al-Qaeda has a lot of training camps going on right now. Two of the key ones that are concerning is obviously suicide bomber training camps. They have 8 affiliated ones in Afghanistan right now. And then they actually have urban warfare training, which is kind of the similar skills we saw of the Hamas attacks, right? So those, I think, is the concerning part, right? Because Americans aren't used to suicide bombings per se or urban warfare attacks, right? So I think that's what we have to get our mind around. These terrorists are trained in ways that, yes, our soldiers seen, but everyday Americans don't have any concept of the capabilities and what they're willing to do.
Even our police forces.
Oh, they don't have the training. They haven't seen it, right? And so we need to really be diverting funds to get them the appropriate training, right? We don't want to leave communities at a disadvantage.
So if you have, 1,500 of these guys in the United States, they're waiting. Are they waiting to be triggered? How would something like that play out? Is there just staging, waiting for the right moment to be triggered to launch an attack?
What I at least know about the Al-Qaeda attack, because remember, there's multiple threats.
Sure.
Even with an Al-Qaeda, there's multiple threats. But the main big coordinated Al-Qaeda attack is none of the actual attackers know the target. They didn't want them to get caught up, like in secondary or something like that, or in questioning. So they'll be given the targets last minute. And that's it'll be in the urban warfare type of environment. So they don't have to do any extra training. They're trained to do what they need to do, if that makes sense.
By.
Yeah. Now, ISIS is a little different. They put out things, like weekly almost, right? Mm-hmm. Target transportation, whatever they ask. There's been a lot, obviously, for the Paris Olympics, right?
Sure.
Do knife attacks, do vehicle rammings. You can't do that. Do an attack with a drone, right? Yeah. So, it really just depends on who's targeting it. And then there's all the others.
Yeah.
So, we have terrorists that came here from the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, right? Mm-hmm. IMU. You worked in Pakistan. I mean, we don't have IMU terrorists in United States, right? Like what are they intending to do? So there's a lot of other terrorist groups here now that really weren't here prior.
Right.
I know for years, Hezbollah's had a lot of businesses and front companies, and they make a lot of money in the United States, right? But I don't think people have thought through, okay, now what if there's trained attackers here? And there's a lot of things we have to prepare for in that case, just because these groups are a different level than petty street crime in the U.S., even murders in the U.S.
Right. So I want to use what we just talked about to speak to the audience a little bit, because I don't ever want the show just to be entertain people, right? What could the audience do on a personal level? I mean, they don't work in the White House. What could they do on a personal level to prepare for something like this?
I really think it's just the preparedness you would do for anything, right? Yeah. I live in Florida, so there's a lot of things you do around hurricanes, right? There's family emergency plans, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's plans, a lot of people make a family emergency plan, and then the father has all the roles. It's well, let's assume he's also at work, and we make a second plan, yes. Right? I think another thing that Americans really could do that's so easy and they forget to do is just basic first aid training, right? Mm-hmm. Even for your kids, right? So you can respond, if a situation happens. Another thing is, if you're really concerned, I think it's important to understand if your law enforcement is aware of the terrorist threats. I've been to police departments and they don't get anything passed down to them related to terrorism as all, right? Some have said, we've never worked a terrorism case, right? They're getting tips at times and like, well, we can't work this. This is terrorism, right? So I think on the community level too, it's kind of like, what are we trained on? What is law enforcement's role and whose job is it to respond? I was talking about this recently, with Scott Mann. If you go to like the DHS See Something, Say Something page, you can give terrorism tips. Well, depending on where you live, so if you live in Florida, you click Florida, and then it is by region, right? So I'm Tampa, Central Florida. And when I click it, it says I need to go to the Tampa Emergency Management Office is where I give a terrorism tip. That's the office that handles hurricanes. Obviously, if I send them a terrorism tip, they're not going to work it, right? So that needs to be fixed. So we need to be a little more engaged in where these things are being worked and who's responsible for them. Because, we make the joke, no one's coming for you. At the community level, you need to do your best to prepare. And you need to make sure not just your police department's doing drills, but, if you have a church, your kid's school, et cetera, like they need to all be prepared.
Yeah. I remember when Columbine happened, all the police departments started training for active shooter scenarios. And, but now today, the only people, I think it stops at like the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, and then it doesn't, like you said, doesn't make its way down. And but I mean, on a practical level, like you said, churches and places that are going to be soft targets, terrorists like soft targets, where there's a lot of people, churches, schools, things like that. Those are at individual levels that the church elder boards could be putting together their security team and talking about stuff like this, and so should the schools. What level? At what level do you think every American has a responsibility to speak up on these things, to speak up and raise concerns in their communities and to their representatives, their state and federal representatives?
Well, I think everyone has a role, because after the fact, if you said, oh, I saw this problem, I saw this issue, but I didn't make the effort to bring it up, well, then you're part of the problem, right? Yeah. All of these people are in their job to work for you, right? And so if you're giving them stuff to do and they're not working for you, it also gives you a reason to vote them out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a way to make your community safer. So I do think people need to take more ownership of it. We had a lot of ownership of it after 9/11, and then it's kind of like fallen off the wayside. Yeah. People are back to, I don't want to get involved again. Or, even people don't want to, they might get charged if they try to help someone in a situation. So it's almost like we have to shift back again. Yeah. And remember, this is your community, right? If you let something happen to your community, it hurts everyone. It hurts the entire resiliency of your community, and that has lasting effects.
Guys, I'm a lifelong athlete. I've tried all kind of things, from every different diet, from all different supplements, tons of different things to make my body as healthy and as functional as possible. I heard about BioPro years ago from jiu-jitsu athletes, from UFC fighters, and they're all friends of mine who I trust that were telling me, you have to try a BioPro, and I did. I experienced a tremendous result, mostly in my sleep, to where I was sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, to where I immediately went to sleeping 9 hours a night. BioPro has helped my recovery, my mental focus. I am a believer. I love it, or I would not be promoting it. If you're interested, go to bioproteintech.com and get yours today.